as Coach DeBoer said, that this year they're going to have a more modified, what they call the A-Day game, which is their spring game. And obviously this is something that we've seen now with a few schools already, at least as far as announcing. There might be more that haven't come out and actually said it yet, but of kind of going away from the traditional spring game. As we've seen it, we've seen USC, we've seen Nebraska, we've seen Texas kind of all come out and say that, yeah, that's not what we're not doing that this year. Um, I think we might actually have differing opinions on here, but so let me get your thoughts on the spring games and where this is all headed right now.
Yeah, it's been a fun conversation for me, kind of just doing what I do in the off season, just talking to coaches all the time. What do you think? What do you think? What do you think? And the conversation does splinter, I think, depending on where the school is. And that's where my opinion comes down on this. I understand why Texas doesn't want to have a spring game. They play 30 games in the last 2 seasons of college football. It's a lot, right? They finish their season January 20th. It's just hard on the body. It's so many snaps. It's such a long season. Ohio State, same deal. Like I get that. And I am a fan of the NFL model of OTAs, especially when you look at the date of the spring portal. Was it April 15th to April 25th? I think it's somewhere right in that window. I'm a fan of treating this thing like the NFL. And instead of having, I think it's 34 days per NCAA to have 15 practices, give them 3 months. Like, give them all the time, and let them do whatever they want. Like, why does anybody care? Like, go April, May, June. Go 2 weekends per month. Like, however you want to navigate that. I would love to see that happen. And I think that is where this thing is going. It's what I think a school like Texas is going to do. I think a school like Ohio State, they're going to have to, as Ryan Day has referenced, like there'll be a ramp up in spring. And I think that's where we're going, Jim. Like, period, full stop. When it comes to the spring game, I am a huge fan of putting players in moments where they have to perform. Like, I love performance anxiety. I feel it every time I do a podcast, every time I broadcast a game. I think it's great for the soul. I don't like seeing that being taken away. That's one. Two, I think that in the old school vein of fans, I think it's cool for fans to come see your college team. I really do. I mean, I read an article last night about Georgia, how they're going to have a spring something because every fan can't afford season tickets. It's not something I ever really thought about. But you can afford to go to a spring game, whether it's a $5 donation or it's for free. You're coming to that spring game. I love that, to just get a glimpse of. But I think we're kind of kidding ourselves of like, what are these games? They're not games. Like, you come out of it and we all try to write or talk about our big takeaways. It's really hard to tell, right? It's like, you see, I can remember doing an SC spring game. I think it was Lincoln Riley's first year, and like they start off under center. You're like, oh, under center and I formation. Like, I'm just making that up, but it's like totally different than what they normally do. So where do I net out on all this? I think it's school dependent. I think it's brand dependent. I think some of the bigger blue bloods, on one hand, I would say, I think my first gut reaction was, if you're Ohio State, if you're Nebraska, if you're one of these big brands, like, have your game. And if guys want to leave, let them leave. But then you dive into it further, especially in this 4-month span before, like, what we presume to be revenue sharing hitting. It is a total free for all. So what's happening now? I'll give you an example. I'll be a backup offensive lineman. Let's just call it Ohio State. And I'm just making these numbers up, but let's just pretend I'm at Ohio State, I'm Penn State, I'm Oregon, I'm one of these big time programs that have resources. If I'm a backup left guard, I'm just going to guess I'm going to make $150,000 this year. Well, at another school, let's just call it, maybe it's Arizona, maybe it's Ole Miss, maybe it's South Carolina. They need a starting left guard, and they can afford to pay $500,000 for that. So they go see that in the spring game and say, you know what, I'm going to go offer Jim Thornby that kind of money. That, to me, is where I have the empathy for the coaches of, like, I get it. You don't want it out there. But at some point, I think, like, what are we going to do? Shut off all, like, communication to a program? Like, I talked to a group of 5 secondary coach, and I said, what's your group like? He goes, it's better than the group I had at a Power 4 school the year prior. He goes, but I'm not talking about any of my guys, because if there's an article on them, then all of a sudden they're going to get poached. Like, think about the worlds that we're in. So I just think I understand it. I don't disagree with it. I don't love it for a bunch of reasons. I support it for a bunch of reasons. I think the last thing, and this is probably what tips the scale for me, why I wish there were spring games. I go back to like the craft that I'm in, and I think of like all the production people that are now losing a handful of days of work. I think I'll always just net out there. Like I'm never a fan of like losing days. So I have an answer. I would just say have a version of, I think what UCLA might do or some other schools might do. They're going to have a showcase. They're going to let fans come. There's just not going to be broadcast. They're not going to do. So you're still allow your fans to have a piece of this thing. That's what I hope every fan base eventually does. But we might be in an NFL model. Like you don't go see the Seahawks in the spring. You don't go see the Rams in the spring. So you're not going to go see the Texas Longhorns in the spring. What does that do to that fan base? Probably nothing. But over time, what does that do if it's Arizona? What does that do if it's Stanford? What does that do if it's Cal? I do think there's remnants of, I don't really know these guys anyway. Screw it, I'm not going to a game.
Yeah, and that
That's where you're
actually
at.
that's the part where I'm 100% at with, because I think about like to one your point, like with the amount of games that some of these teams are playing. Yeah, this is the time that like these guys are getting their off-season surgery, and like they're this is for them to get healthy to be able to then be ready for fall practice when they're actually competing and stuff like that. I can remember uh, several times during our years in the Pac-12 where like you would be almost up to the day of the event where you're like the coach is not really sure what they're doing that day because oh well we have enough healthy offensive linemen to be able to
Totally.
to do this. There's so many things that they're not really putting out there, and for obvious reasons. But
Yep.
like of why is the format this? Why is the format that? Like they're constantly like shuffling that just to meet the personnel that they have available for that. And I forget who it was. I saw somebody had the quote was it was like it might have even been Sark, but it was talking about like half the team has too many snaps and the other half doesn't have enough.
Totally.
Like, and you're trying to figure out how do you do all this? And like you mentioned the 15 practices. I would like to see, you keep those 15 practices, um, the 15 practices, and that is kind of untouched. But then you allow for each team to have a quote unquote like marketing day. Because to me, that's what always
Yeah.
was what that spring game was like people I remember a lot of times that we'd have different opinions even in the Pac-12 in the office. So people are like, oh, they got to play a game, they got to play a game. I'm like, who cares if they play a game? Like what I would want if I am a team X, would I rather a broadcast that is like really showcasing my higher end players, the players that either you already know or that you want to know more about, or do you want to see the fourth and fifth stringers take actual snaps? Like to me that was always the biggest sell was, hey, let us do an infomercial basically for your program for 60 minutes. Let us tell your stories. Now I get it now, like with the portal, like that kind of like makes that a little bit scarier for them. But when you're a program asking fans for NIL money, they need the fans want to know who these guys are.
Yeah.
Like, why am I going to give you money if I don't even know who these? With so many people coming and leaving, like it's hard to really, you know, connect with these programs when you don't know who the guys are and you're not like actively pushing on that. Like, again, I get it, like because you are like that now exposing if you're a group of five school and now you're exposing this guy to bigger schools or whatever, but it's, at some point that's going to happen or it's not.
Yeah. You know what's interesting, Jim, is that I think there's two thoughts here. One, and I think most schools are going to do this, right? Remember, rosters are getting cut to 105. I I've been heartbroken with the amount of conversations I've had with walk-ons in college football. And they call me because I'm a former walk-on, and you know me, I give my number to anybody. But it's what do I do? Where do I go? Because the coach just told me I don't have a spot on the team, which I applaud the coach for getting ahead of it. But God, does it break my heart? So what's going to happen? A lot of coaches, Matt Rule just came out and said this. I think I'd imagine a lot of teams are going to take like an NFL model, 54, 57 active players. Like those are their guys. And then there's the developmental roster. And then there's another 10 spots that maybe become like those walk-on-y type of places. Because remember, schools can do whatever they want with the money now, right? So do you partial guy, like how do you want to navigate the money you have in rev share is really the question. The other part of this is that we can't ignore, in my opinion, what's happening in college football. Like there's a separation, and not just between San Jose State and Alabama. It's to your point, like you want to get to know these players, right? You want to get to know Arizona's players. You want to get to know Cal's players. You want to get to know, like, as you hear like the howling. I have a new dog. I don't know if like literally it's like a wolf out here. Um, anyway, that's
He's
another
excited
story.
for
Yeah,
spring
yeah,
ball.
yeah. That's for a newsletter. But my point is that like if you don't get to know the players at Arizona, at Cal, like some of these Power Four schools that didn't just have a run that Arizona State had. Like think about that. To me is the concern because now, to your point, as an alum of Arizona, an alum of let's just say Cal, an alum of Stanford, like if you become what's the best word, like apathetic, like that is the worst thing that could happen because now your school is part of a league to get media dollars to just be part of the conversation. But your fan base doesn't feel a connection to the team, but the staff doesn't want to unveil everything about the team because they want to protect the team. Like it's a really tough balance. And that's why I say like it's always important in these conversations to be like super, you have to compete to be empathetic and see it through the lens of these coaches. Like Justin Wilcox doesn't want to lose his roster. He has before. I mean, Nico Remigio left to go to Fresno, right? Like, and that wasn't even, and he, there's a, I don't know the exact reason why I left, but the point is that like, that's the part that gets always forgotten in these conversations is these teams that maybe aren't in the Big Ten or the SEC that are sitting in the Big 12 or in the ACC, especially in the West Coast, and you're kind of like a random outlier. Cal and Stanford, random outliers in the ACC. Arizona State goes off last year. Utah is always going to be strong, but they were down. Like Arizona coming off a challenging season, like how are they going to be able to Brennan navigate this thing? Like I just think overall, like those are the schools that I worry about. Of like, are your fans going to be at some point like your conference fell apart for whatever reason or for a variety of reasons, and now I don't get to know the team, and that's why I think a lot of the mid tier power schools are going to have a spring something. Do they get on TV? I think that's up to TV partners. There's so much that goes into that. Like at the Big Ten, we cover the game if you have a game, but if you have practice, I don't think we're necessarily going there to cover the showcase, which the team probably likes. Fan base, maybe not. I don't know. TBD.
Yeah. And I,
So
I actually really enjoyed the quote unquote showcases,
yeah, me
like
too.
because the coaches talked more. You learn more about the players. Like you weren't so much worried about like, oh, okay, 3rd and 7, we're running this. Like, great. Like let me know more about these guys.